After her father's death, Lena found herself lashing out at everyone, especially her partner and children. She refused to talk about the funeral, refused to cry, and dismissed her siblings' sorrow as a weakness. Instead, she grew irritable, judgmental, and deeply controlling. What she didn't realize was that her grief hadn't disappeared. It had twisted into something unrecognizable. Her deep sadness had been distorted into anger and rigid control. Welcome to this mini-series on understanding the language of grief, loss, and trauma. My name is Nathalie Himmelrich. I'm a somatic practitioner, psychological therapist, educator, and author, specializing in grief and trauma, and the host of the How to Deal with Grief and Trauma podcast. Grief and trauma are deeply human experiences, yet many of us struggle to describe what we are going through or to understand what others are facing. The vocabulary of loss is vast, varied, and sometimes overwhelming. In this short podcast episode series, we'll explore the different types of grief, loss, and trauma that people encounter throughout life. Each mini-episode serves both as an educational tool and a compassionate companion for anyone trying to make sense of their own experience with grief, loss, and trauma, or someone who is supporting someone else who is. These terms are more than labels. They are doorways into greater understanding, healing, and connection. Whether you are a bereaved parent, a caregiver, a therapist, or someone walking alongside a grieving friend or someone who's experienced trauma, these bite-sized episodes aim to give you language, insight, and tools. Each one includes a definition, some key considerations, an explanation of why it matters, relevant podcast episodes, and frequently asked questions that I have been asked by my clients and you, the listener of the podcast. And my answers are all grounded in both professional and lived experience. So let's begin. Distorted grief occurs when grief takes an extreme or maladaptive emotional or behavioral expression. Instead of showing up as sadness or longing, it may emerge as aggression, guilt, perfectionism, blame, or self-destructive behaviors. Distorted grief is often a protective response. When overwhelming pain feels too threatening, the psyche deflects it through other emotions such as anger or control. And it's actually more common in those who've had to suppress emotions, had early losses, or weren't allowed to grieve openly. If it is left unacknowledged, distorted grief can strain relationships, fuel cycles of self-harm or shame, and prevent healing. Recognizing that these behaviors may be rooted in grief can soften judgment from others and from oneself and open the door to compassionate care. So many of the interviewers in the How to Deal with Grief and Trauma podcast share about their way of dealing with grief and trauma, and have experienced periods of distorted grief with maladaptive strategies to deal with the intensity of the pain. The question is not whether that is an experience someone has, but is it left unacknowledged, and what is done about it? Can grief really look like anger? Yes, especially if sadness wasn't safe to be expressed. What causes distorted grief? For example, emotional suppression, trauma, unresolved guilt, or loss during childhood. Is distorted grief always obvious? No, because it may be hidden in overfunctioning, rigid routines, or emotional numbness. How can I tell if someone's grief is distorted? So look for intense emotional reactions that seem disproportionate, unrelated, or chronic, especially if tied to a major loss. So can distorted grief turn into other disorders? So it can contribute to depression, anxiety, relationship issues, or physical health problem if unaddressed. And what can help is gentle acknowledgement, therapy, again, especially if it's grief-informed, somatic practices such as somatic experience, and someone that creates a safe space for emotional expression. Is distorted grief shameful? Not at all. It's a sign of the nervous system trying to protect itself, not a moral failure. Someone asked this question, which I think is very interesting. How can I help someone with distorted grief? So importantly, don't confront them. Because as I said, it's a protection mechanism from the nervous system, and it is important for them to have it. But stay curious and compassionate. Invite a dialogue and model emotional safety. In the next episode, I'll be talking about stigmatized grief. So stay tuned. I hope this episode has helped you feel more grounded in the language of loss, grief, or trauma, and maybe even offered you some clarity, validation, or insight into your own experience or the experience of someone you care about. Grief and trauma are deeply personal, yet universal. When we can name what we're feeling, we take one powerful step closer to healing and the integration of our experience back into our life. If this series resonates with you, I invite you to keep exploring. You'll find more resources, courses, and ways to work with me at nathaliehimmelrich.com. And of course, you're always welcome to revisit any of the episodes whenever you need a gentle reminder that you're not alone. Until next time, take good care of your heart.